community. First time in this facility. I am a member of the space, so that's cool. But last time I spoke, it was July 16th, 2024, and that's okay. It was the last evening at the Independence Institute before we got this space. It's been awesome. I put this in the Telegram thread. I really don't want to just talk for hours and hours and hours. I can, I often do and might, but I really want this to be interactive. I've got some things I think might be relevant, might be kind of interesting, and we're just going to see where it goes from there. I think all questions are fair game questions. If I don't know an answer, I'll either make something up or I'll tell you I don't know. But as I was thinking about this, well, first of all, I looked at the block height just now. We're at block 909,775, and the Coinbase message you can pull this up on a Block Explorer. The Coinbase message is drop gold. I mean, that's crazy. It's like serendipitous. And I did not mind that block, so I didn't put the Coinbase message in there. But last time I spoke, Bitcoin was at $65,000 per token. And then here we sit today, and it's almost gone 2x in a little over a year. It's been nuts. It's been crazy. The reason I bring that up is maybe a little bit about me first. I'm an estate planning attorney by background. That's what I did for 25 years, thereabouts. And my focus was on trusts, estate planning, kind of increasingly for more and more affluent people. So I did a lot of tax-based planning, a lot of different jurisdictions that I would incorporate, different types of trust structures, different entities underneath those trusts. And then in 2017, I got introduced to a family who had about $150 million worth of Bitcoin back in 2017. That's a fair size stack. Yeah, their kids are going to make it. They're going to be fine. And I was challenged. My business partner and I were challenged with the prospect of applying what we understood about estate planning and conventional normie tax law to this unusual asset that I don't think either of us had ever even heard of back in 2017. It was this, I came to find out, this was the height of the block size wars. This was the hard fork wars. All this kind of crazy stuff was going on. Silk Road had been wound down, a couple of years past Mt. Gox, and there was just a lot of turbulence in the Bitcoin space. And, but just being a really kind of curious guy, I started thinking about, well, how can we apply the same types of strategies that we do with conventional assets? How can we apply those to this really unusual asset that nobody's really even thinking about from like a traditional financial, legal structuring perspective? And so that started me on my journey. So that was November of 17. And along the way, we had done a bunch of different types of trusts, as we did. And along the way, the client said, hey, these are great strategies, but will you help me kind of maintain these things over time? They wanted to buy some real estate. They wanted help with that. They needed to set up their multi-sig. I had to figure out what the hell that meant. They wanted help with large OTC trades, so we had to help them figure out that. And so along the way, we just kind of became this financial services group around this family. Fast forward a few years, throughout that journey, I just got deeper and deeper down the Bitcoin rabbit hole, as we say, of course. Just wanting to do more and more and more in this space. And along the way, started picking up more clients that had a similar profile to this first client of ours. And so a couple of years went by during the Biden administration, more specifically during the Gary Gensler administration. We were concerned that some potentially difficult regulation was going to be coming through from the SEC, and that the SEC was going to want to regulate Bitcoin and other crypto assets like they regulate traditional equities. So we restructured Bespoke into a registered investment advisory, got SEC registered in 22, 23, and just became now a full-service wealth strategy group for affluent clients who just happen to have made a ton of wealth in Bitcoin fairly early. So it's I think we're still kind of unicorns in the space. I don't know of anybody else who does what we do. but it gives me an opportunity to, I guess kind of the gospel that I get to share is that we sit kind of at the intersection of the Bitcoin world that has becoming more and more and more relevant in the normie world, and the normie world that is still bound by fiat rules, tax laws, things like that. And so we sit in the middle for these clients who built a lot of wealth in Bitcoin, understand Bitcoin, and have seen it kind of evolve from being nothing more than peer-to-peer electronic cash. But because of the decaying supply rate through the halving mechanism, it can't help but increase dramatically in value in US dollar terms. So they kind of sit in this tension of this thing that was intended to be decentralized, privatized, peer-to-peer cash, and now, holy cow, this has become transformational wealth for my family. And so we get to help them navigate these complexities. And you can see that the problem just got twice as bad in the last 13 months. So anyway, I just thought that'd be kind of a nice way to set the table. One thing to emphasize, just because I am regulated by the SEC, and my daughter, who is also my chief operating officer and also my chief of compliance, will tell me that this is not investment advice. But since Bitcoin is not regulated by the SEC, just go buy more Bitcoin and it'll be fine. And although I'm a licensed attorney, I'm no longer a practicing attorney, so this is not legal advice. Don't make any legal decisions. Don't make any binding or tax decisions based off of something you see here or you talk about here. I'll be happy to connect you with somebody. You can't hire me to do that stuff. I don't do that anymore. I do this stuff. Where do I want to start? So, any questions immediately come to mind? I want this to be. I've got a list. Feel free to pop it. That's fine. You're not gonna throw me off. It's totally fine. It's totally fine. If you burp, it's totally fine. I don't care. Do anybody have any questions that they want to start with? Valerie has a question. Yeah, it's tough, Val. I mean, I got to tell you, I'm not the best guy to answer that question. Not because I'm trying to be coy. I truly don't know. I will say, yeah. So what's non-KYC Bitcoin? The not wanting to pay tax, you're not going to get out of that. I think it's not going to help you, Val. And here's why. I mean, I understand the non-KYC from a privacy perspective, and I'm right there with you emotionally to the deepest core of my soul. You're not going to get out of the tax in a legal way. And here's why. Because as a US citizen, and I'll get to the expatriation question here in a minute, but as a US citizen, you are subject to income tax on your worldwide income, which includes capital gains, when you ultimately want to turn those Bitcoins back into some fiat currency or something else, another piece of property in Dubai or whatever. You transition that's a capital gains event. The IRS doesn't care where you happen to live, even where you're a permanent resident. If you are a US citizen, they want their pound of flesh. And if you fail to file, then they're going to pop you for tax evasion, and then you're going to be in Club Fed with Ghislaine Maxwell. So there's no getting around the tax side of it. Non-KYC is not going to help you. And I think this is. I think that the days of them never finding out are gone. I just think they're gone because they're not idiots. I mean, at $120,000 Bitcoin, they've got a lot of economic incentive to figure out how the blockchain works and how to figure out these forensics, and I mean, you're still transacting on a public blockchain. And so it's like they're gonna, will they get everybody? Absolutely not. Might they get you? What's the risk? If you're willing to live with that risk, then live with the risk. If you're not, then you've got to do legally recognized structures. And the non-KYC from a privacy perspective, again, that's near and dear to my heart. I haven't figured out how to crack that nut myself, because the clients that we get to work with, they're dealing with Bitcoin wealth on a order of magnitude. It's like they need to move large chunks when they move it. We've got a charitable trust that's probably going to move out about $39 million worth of Bitcoin in the next couple of years. We can talk about some charitable strategies that are designed for this purpose. But you're going to move a big chunk like that. If you want to have a decent counterparty, a reliable counterparty, where you know settlement is going to be legit, and you're going to get what you've got coming in the trade, then you're going to be dealing with a big OTC like Cumberland or Anchorage or something like that. And I think that's just the reality of $120,000 Bitcoin. And I think that the days of $100,000 Bitcoin is long gone. I just don't think we're ever going to go down again to that level. I mean, I think, again, and I'm not just trying to be like the orange bull. I mean, I know I'm among friends here, so I know this is like a very popular thing to say. I just think it's true, because I think the Overton window is just so clearly shifted in favor of Bitcoin. You've got massive multinationals adding it to the balance sheet. You've got nation states that are talking seriously about reserves. You got 450 new Bitcoins a day that are hitting the market. You got massive supply shock facing a massive amount of demand. One of the things that I need to be thinking about, that I actually would like some advice from somebody here in the space or somewhere else, is what is happening existentially in Bitcoin that might make me wrong? It's like, I'm not super concerned about quantum, because I think that's probably overwrought a little bit. I think quantum is kind of like a force multiplier that everybody gets to take advantage of that technology, including Bitcoin. But what else might there be that could prove an existential risk to Bitcoin? I don't know. Again, I would love to have an advisor who knows code really, really well, who's out there surveying the landscape, can do it somewhat dispassionately, because I'm like ideologically all in. It's like, I need somebody to help me see our blind spots. So that's, but I just don't see anything right now that moves us significantly lower from where we are. So when you sell your house and buy Bitcoin, however you buy your Bitcoin, that will be a capital gains event as to your house, which you're going to have an exemption as your primary residence. But if your equity is above that exemption, you're going to have a capital gains recognition event. Then you're going to invest the net in Bitcoin. Now you hold Bitcoin. Well, that creates your basis for capital gains tax purposes at the moment you acquire that. So you buy a token, that's $120,000 worth of Bitcoin. Then, whenever you sell it, or trade it peer-to-peer, swap it for a shitcoin like ETH, buy a piece of real estate with it, buy some analog Bitcoin, you turn it from anything other than that Bitcoin, that's another capital gains recognition event. And then you, as a person of conscience, have to decide how you will report to the Internal Revenue Service with the gains or losses that go along with that. Income tax is probably one of the hardest things to plan for. My area of expertise centers more around the gift and estate tax side of things, just because of the clients that I've seen. You had a question or a comment? No, that's great.
Could you play the lender game?
Yes. We'll play the lender game, so say more about that.
Well, so like, if you just kind of assume it's going to go up in perpetuity to go work around triggering capital.
By borrowing fiat against it?
Yes.
Absolutely.
So
Yeah,
that
absolutely.
would be a way to keep your
Yes.
stuff and not end up having to pay on it, as long as you have enough to cover it.
And I think that's the smarter move, and I think that's what we see these corporate treasuries now really looking to do is build a reserve of this this asset, the volatility is definitely coming out of Bitcoin. It has been consistently coming out of Bitcoin since, well, I mean, here I'm talking about a 2x rise in 13 months. But just, I think we've all seen just like as the spot price, well, as the network acceptance has grown and as the number of Bitcoins becomes increasingly issued, we see the volatility starting to come out of the market. The companies like Strategy and these other companies that are adding Bitcoin to the reserves are now using Bitcoin as this longer-term store of value inside the company to then issue shares backed by their Bitcoin. MicroStrategy just did 4 new IPOs with new products that are just kind of variations of their stock with different levels of Bitcoin backing. The lowest is 2-to-1, the highest is 10-to-1, and they've got a couple of variations in the middle. It's their way of trying to generate what feels like yield on Bitcoin, but it's really just a MicroStrategy IPO. You know, that's all it is. I've got a little bit of that just to kind of play with it and see what it does. But it's not Bitcoin, it's just their ticker that's running off of a portion of their allocated reserve of their Bitcoin position. But the broader point, and we just came back from a happy hour with Jamie Dimon's team at JP Morgan, and one of the things that they're looking to do is lend not against Bitcoin, but lend against the ETFs. And so one thing that a Bitcoiner could potentially do, again, this is not fully formed yet, but we just got authorization from the SEC that this is now coming, is that you can contribute Bitcoin in kind in exchange for ETF shares, like BlackRock ETFs or Fidelity's ETF or whatever, and then even institutions like JP Morgan, Goldman, whomever, will loan dollars against your ETF interests. And then once you repay that, you could redeem your ETF interests back in kind and go back to Bitcoin that way. So that's not on the market yet, but that should be coming within the next couple of months. And so that's another thing that you can do if you're wanting to play the borrow game without recognizing a capital gains event. It's not going to change your basis, because if you have a $120,000 basis in your Bitcoin and you put that in the ETF, and then you later redeem your Bitcoin from the ETF, your basis is not the fair market value of Bitcoin when you redeemed it. Your basis is returned back to you at when you put it in. So you're not going to be able to wash your capital gains out, but it could be a way to unlock dollars against Bitcoin in that type of structure. I think you had a question back there, I think.
Yeah, I was just going to touch on the point that it's interesting what MicroStrategy is doing in terms of not necessarily just one-to-one Bitcoin exposure, but also allowing Bitcoin exposure to capital that might not otherwise be able to access stock.
Right. I mean, what Michael Saylor has done there is, I mean, it's just a stroke of genius. I mean, you know, it's right. Yeah. Right. Right. Yeah, I think so. And it's, you know, these are all new products. Like I said, I'm kind of dabbling into them a little bit personally, just because I want to kind of see how they work. And Michael Saylor's made some pretty good decisions in the past, so I figure it's worth a flyer just to kind of see what it does. I was talking with Wyatt. I guess Wyatt must have ducked out, but one of the questions I think that we're going to have to deal with, which again may be an existential threat to Bitcoin at some point, is to what degree is this just the issuance of new paper Bitcoin, and we no longer have a 21 million hard cap in a practical economic terms. I think there's an argument that there's been a lot of artificial price manipulation just first by the exchanges, and then the activities of BlockFi, Celsius, FTX, Alameda, kind of artificially kind of constraining the price. I think there's an argument to be made that these big market makers, like the ETFs out there, the companies buying up Bitcoin, it's like, why is the value of my Bitcoin not 200,000, 500,000 right now? Just because we see, it kind of feels like there's this unfettered demand. And I know there's only 450 new ones a day. So where's all this Bitcoin that's being sold? Where's it coming from? I think that's no, he ain't selling. One of the things that I there are a few things I want to talk about that might kind of pique some interests. There's a lot of talk about trusts, and that's kind of my old world. And so I think this might be where I want to start to pivot a little bit. There are a lot of different types of trusts out there, and I think as a result, there's a lot of confusion around trusts. Some people think that a trust is just like this magic thing that will do everything that they want it to possibly do and then some. And it's not, because there are like dozens and dozens and dozens of different types of trusts that can be designed for different things. The concept of trusts goes all the way back to the Crusades. I mean, this is ancient law. It originated during the Crusades when crusaders would go off to fight their battles. They would entrust their lands, usually to the clergy that were running the parishes in the areas where the warriors left. And so the clergy would take care of the land, take care of the livestock, and then assuming that the people who went to the Crusades actually got to come home from the Crusades, then the clergy would return the land back to the original landowner. So it was just an entrustment of property to somebody else who had liability to God, if you will, to exercise their best judgment on behalf of the landowner. Well, fast forward through the 17th, 18th, 19th, and 20th centuries, that origin kind of carries forward. But really what you have is, a trust is simply an agreement. It's a legally binding agreement between multiple parties. It says, I entrust Chris as my trustee to manage the stuff that I give him for the benefit of the people I've identified as my beneficiaries, according to the law and according to my instructions. That's all a trust is. It could even be as simple as a verbal statement like that. But then, if you want to have it actually be legally binding and meaningful, we're going to document this somehow. So then, the most basic thing I would say is I would create a revocable trust, one that I can later change the terms of, or later just revoke it altogether. I could write down on a piece of paper, I, Matt McClintock, entrust Chris to manage my home. I'll identify that. My vehicles, I'll identify those. I'll identify my normie accounts. I'll identify my Bitcoin. He's got to manage this for me, for my benefit, and if I die, for the benefit of my wife, my children, or the causes that I care about. That's a trust. But if I reserve the right to say, you know, Chris, I changed my mind. I'm going to take all that stuff back. Or, you know what, Chris, I've changed my mind. I want to say, you know what? Rather than give it to my wife and my kids, I want to give it to some charity, or give it to the space. I'll create a permanent endowment for the space. Or maybe my wife dies, and so I said, you know what? I need to change what I did for my wife. Well, if I can change it, then that's a revocable type of trust. That provides the ability for me to privatize the process of managing those assets for me, because Chris can now show up and say, hey, I've got the instructions that say what I'm supposed to do with these assets inside the trust. So he's got the legal authority. So when he goes to the bank, he can say, hey, bank, those assets belong to this trust. I'm the trustee of that trust, so I have the authority to manage these assets for the benefit of the people inside the trust. A revocable trust like that, if it's done properly, can allow Chris to manage my financial affairs without having to go to court if I become incapacitated because I've had a stroke, I get injured, I get hit by a car, or if I die. He doesn't have to go through a probate process, which is done in the county where you happen to live when you die. He doesn't have to go to a probate process to do what he needs to do to take care of my financial affairs. But during my lifetime, that type of trust, a revocable trust, gives me no tax advantages at all. It might give me a little bit of privacy if I'm smart enough in how I structure this trust in the first place. It also gives me zero asset protection because I can revoke the trust anytime I want to. I still have unilateral control. So if I run over a pedestrian and I get sued, I can't say, oh, I don't own this stuff, it belongs to my trust. Well, then Frank Azar is going to say, well, do you have the ability to revoke that trust? I'm going to have to sheepishly say yes. And so then Frank is going to strong arm all that money out of my trust and give it to his client, less his 33% or whatever the hell he takes. But that doesn't mean that revocable trusts are useless. Honestly, I think that everybody ought to have a revocable trust. I've had a revocable trust since 2001, and I've gone through just a lot of different changes in that trust. 2001, I still had a pager in 2001. It's like this is 8 years before the Genesis block. It's that long ago. So the revocable living trust is kind of this living, breathing relationship that you kind of carry forward with your property. It really should cover the bulk of your estate, the bulk of your property, until you get into really big numbers. I was talking to Zach earlier about the tax code. I think he may have stepped out. But I'll talk a little bit about gift and estate tax, which is going to get us into a different type of trust construct called an irrevocable trust. And the revocable trust that I was talking about earlier, it's like when I've got Bitcoin to consider in my estate plan, really if I have anything that is a disproportionate amount of value, so for you, if you've got 90% in real estate, or 90% in NVIDIA stock, or 90% in Bitcoin, then there are some things you have to do in drafting that trust agreement so that your trustee can actually comply with the law. There's this thing called the prudent investor rule, which says that unless the trust says otherwise, the trustee has to kind of rebalance the trust assets so it's not overweighted in any one particular thing. Got to smooth volatility out of the trust. You can waive that. If you create the trust, if you're the one who sets this up, you can waive that. I've waived that as to Bitcoin in my trust because I'm heavyweight. There's some other things that you need to do inside the trust instrument, but really every person who has a roof over their head probably ought to have that kind of trust. But then once you get into big numbers where you start having like tens of millions of dollars, there's a whole lot of different types of trust constructs. So I mentioned that privacy is somewhat available in a revocable trust. This kind of goes to the naming convention that you might use. Like my trust is not called the Matt McClintock Revocable Trust. I made up a name. And so it's that name. Yours could be Satoshi's Woman Revocable Trust or whatever you want to call it. Still stacking, whatever you want to call it. Preserving wealth. I've got two daughters. I hope that the Bitcoin that I have and the other stuff that I'm doing in my life will be economically meaningful to my kids. When I ultimately slip this mortal coil, what I leave behind, I want that to be preserved for my kids. I mean, I love my son-in-law. I love my future son-in-law that Lauren's going to marry. But if they turn out to be a jerk and that marriage doesn't work out, I don't want them walking off with half of the inheritance I left behind. I want to preserve what I have for the benefit of my kids. And so I can do that through the structure of the trust. And I can even do that in a revocable trust. Providing for others, if I wanted to create a massive endowment for the space or whatever, then I could do that with a gift in perpetuity, perhaps. Or it could be a one-time gift. We'll see. Maybe I'll drop a Bitcoin. Maybe. And then reducing taxes, like I said, there's the revocable trust is tax neutral from an income tax, capital gains tax perspective. What it does do is it allows you to postpone any estate tax. If you have a large estate, it allows you to postpone the estate tax until your spouse dies, if you're married. You can kind of kick the can down the road and just defer the payment of estate tax through a revocable living trust if you are a married person. Quick note on that, even though, so same-sex marriages count, civil unions do not. In order to take advantage of this tax deferral at death, it has to be a gift to your legally wed spouse. So just bear that in mind. If you're not legally married but you've been together for 40 years, doesn't matter. It has to be legally recognized marriage. No, prenup is what you would do going into a marriage to say she can't have your sats. This paper sticks together. Any questions yet at this point before we turn the page? Yes, sir. What's your name? Ben. Okay, great. I'm Matt. Nice to meet you. Yep. It's so the question, just for the recording, is it to set up a trust, is it a one-time fee, or is it something that you pay year after year after year? You're going to love this answer. It depends. But if you start with a revocable trust, think about that as like a one-time type of thing. But I wouldn't say you set it and forget it, because everything is going to change. I mean, Bitcoin is going to go 2x again, or 5x again, or whatever. And so if what you've thought about from a wealth and tax perspective is going to get outdated within several years, most likely. Your life, especially as a young adult, your life is going to change. I don't know if you're in a relationship now, but you might find yourself in one in the future. You might have kids in the future. You might be the space's next big benefactor. So you have, your circumstances will change, and as we'll talk about here in a minute, the law is going to change, regulations are going to change. You might have a stroke and decide for some reason you want to move someplace other than Colorado, and so then you decide, well, if I have a Colorado trust, but now I'm a resident of Texas or New Hampshire, it probably makes sense to actually have the trust redone at certain life stages to make sure that the trust, because remember, it's a written agreement between you and who you've selected as the decision maker for you. When your needs change, you need to make sure that that legal agreement reflects the new reality. So there should not be any like annual ongoing, just like going to get your oil change type of fee, but it's like when something does need to be done, you should expect to pay somebody to have to do that. And I would say that you probably don't want to you should probably think about setting up your trust like doing dental work. You probably want to have a professional do it. You probably don't want to do it yourself, because the cost of getting it wrong can be pretty bad. So there, I can speak candidly about this because I don't practice law anymore, so you can't hire me anyway. But a good estate planning attorney is worth their cost. Now, If you have irrevocable trusts, we're talking about protecting massive amounts of wealth, either from a tax perspective or asset protection purpose or whatever, you will have ongoing carrying costs on those, usually in the form of the trustee fee. Because when you have an irrevocable trust, you can't be your own trustee. So let me step back a second. On my revocable trust, Chris is not my trustee as much as I like him. It's revocable by me. I have no asset protection. I can do whatever I want to with it. I might as well be the one who's the trustee. So I manage my own assets inside my own revocable trust. Now, if I have a stroke or if I die, I have to designate somebody else, and maybe that's Chris, maybe that's Lauren, maybe that's Ben. But I can create a succession mechanism built into my trust agreement. But then what happens if Chris dies and Lauren dies and now Ben dies and I don't have a named trustee? Or let's just say life goes on, I don't have those relationships anymore. Now I need to name a new trustee. I better update the trust agreement to reflect that new change. But if I have an irrevocable trust, I can't be my own trustee and expect the tax benefits that an irrevocable trust can give me, or expect the asset protection benefits that a trust can give me. Because in an irrevocable trust, if I want tax benefits or if I want asset protection benefits, I have to substantially change my relationship with my assets in order to get the protections that the trust will offer. And if I am still the trustee managing the assets, then I haven't changed my position with my assets at the end of the day. So if I have an irrevocable trust, like a dynasty trust, or like any number of the like alphabet soup acronyms that get thrown around as different types of trusts, you're going to have a third-party independent trustee. It could be a family member, it could be a trust company, but the trustee has to be physically present in the jurisdiction where you have established your trust. So one of the things that's really common in the Bitcoin space and kind of in the broader kind of emerging finance space is the idea of Wyoming-based trusts or Nevada-based trusts or South Dakota-based trusts or certain offshore trusts. Those are great. We're big fans of all of those things. But the thing you have to bear in mind is if you want a Wyoming trust, you have to have a Wyoming trustee. That Wyoming trustee is going to charge you an annual fee for the documentation and for the privilege of taking advantage of their very friendly jurisdiction. So it's kind of a laborious answer to your question, but that's kind of why I said it depends. It's kind of an involved thing. And then depending on the type of trust, you may or may not have a new tax return to file. So anyway, it's probably a rabbit trail not worth going down for right now. One of the things I wanted to talk about that Zach and I were talking about beforehand, when I spoke last in July of 2024, we were still subject to the 2017 Tax Act. That was the Tax Act that came in under Donald Trump's first administration. What that Tax Act did is it took the $5 million per taxpayer estate tax exemption and temporarily doubled that to $10 million per federal taxpayer, and then allowed it to adjust for inflation. So what this means is if you were to die this year, in 2025, you would, in the total wealth that you have, Bitcoin, real estate, everything else, if your total wealth was greater than 13.995 million, or if you had more than 116.6 Bitcoins, then the first SAT above that is taxed at 40%. Okay? So if you die this year and you hold more than 116 Bitcoins, you are exposed to federal estate tax at the rate of 40%. What the new Tax Act does, and again, quick before I get to the new Tax Act, this 2017 Tax Act had a built-in expiration date called the sunset. It was set to expire automatically at the end of this year, at which point the exemption falls from 10 million plus adjustment for inflation down to 5 million adjusted for inflation. It would get cut in half. What the 2025 Tax Act did is this is not an extension. This is actually a new bill. And so this is cool because it sets a new floor. The new floor, starting in January of 2026, the new floor is 15 million. So 125 Bitcoins at today's price. So that means that in January, for all of 2026, if and to the extent your total stack is more than 125 Bitcoins, you are potentially exposed to federal estate tax, again, at the rate of 40 cents on the dollar. And this number will again be adjusted each year based on inflation. So the $15 million will become 15 and some change in 2027, 15 and some change, or 16 and some change the next year, and so on. I haven't looked at it to see when the expiration date of this new tax act is, but all tax acts usually have a built-in expiration date because under this arcane rule in the Senate, a tax bill has to pay for itself within a projected budgetary window, and if it doesn't, it has to be considered a temporary tax law. But one thing that is permanent is the $15 million floor. So just like we probably will never see $100,000 Bitcoin again, we'll probably never see an estate tax below 15 million again. So it's not bad news, but if Bitcoin keeps doing what Bitcoin has kept doing, hopefully someday we'll all have this problem. The good news is, guys like me know lots of ways to get massive amounts of juice through a $15 million exemption hole. There are lots of strategies you can combine and then rinse and repeat and do it again, especially if you add charitable strategies like For the Space and other wonderful charities out there. You can just get so much juice. We've got clients who have hundreds of millions of dollars of wealth that will, because of some of the strategies that we can help them establish, they will never pay a penny of estate tax. But it's because you have to connect the dots between the Bitcoin world and taking advantage of these tax laws and then allowing yourself to legally exploit how the tax code works to then get your value out of the system. Yeah, please.
I missed the very beginning, so
Uh-huh.
I apologize.
That's fine.
As far as like CASA and Unchained,
Mhm.
like is this just like more of a higher wealth, very bespoke service, or is like what separates the things that you offer?
Yeah.
Is there any more tax knowledge than maybe they
Well,
have? Like, I'm trying to wrap
yeah.
that a little bit more around.
Yeah, and let me be clear. I'm not here selling anything. I mean, it's like I love the guys at Casa. I love the folks at Unchained, OnRamp, all those folks. So we just are strategic advisors for affluent families, and so they just pay us to be their advisors. And so our typical client probably has a minimum of $50 million worth of total wealth.
Your clients could theoretically also be CASA.
Sure. Yeah. And if I don't get to it shortly, please help me circle back to it, because I do want to talk about different type of key management frameworks at different levels, depending on what you want to accomplish. As to whether it's Unchained's inheritance solution, or if Casa's got one, or the stuff that OnRamp is promoting right now, I've got to be quite honest, I don't know enough about the details on how the key framework works to know if it will pass the legal and tax scrutiny. So right. So here's what I would say is and this is kind of a nice segue into the key, like kind of sizing your key management regime. And I do this for myself. This is how we talk to clients about it. I've got like beer money Bitcoin on a warm wallet on my phone. If we went to a pub and I wanted to buy a round, I could do that, fine. But I don't keep anything in there that is material. Like if I got hit by a bus on the way across the street and nobody could recover that, kind of sucks because I've been hit by a bus, but it's not like the bulk of my holdings. The next size up for me is where I start getting into my revocable living trust. Because again, I can unilaterally control every asset inside my revocable living trust. And so because there is no tax or legal advantage for me to put that into a qualified custody type of structure, I would either use an unchained type of structure or a CASA type of structure. Ideally, I'm going to use some kind of, nice UX, like a nice UI multi-sig type of environment where my kids can access it. I can create my M of N with my protocols, but I don't get any tax outcomes from that because again, I control the quorum. I select who holds the key material. Fine, that's a wonderful solution. I think it's a wonderful solution for probably 95 to 99% of everybody. But then once you start thinking of long-term like legacy stack, I've got 10 Bitcoins, 20 Bitcoins, 50 Bitcoins, whatever that number is. It's like, okay, this is the stuff that this is going to be the bedrock of my family's wealth into the future. Then I start thinking about, okay, well, what happens if, so the multi-sig helps if I get run over by a car, but the multi-sig doesn't help if I run over somebody else with the car. It also doesn't help me from a tax perspective to shift the value out of my estate if I'm looking for a long-term, like multi-generational play. If I say, you know what, I want to set aside X Bitcoins to be held indefinitely for the benefit of my family, like the family endowment. They can borrow against it, maybe kind of opportunistically smooth some of the volatility with some targeted sales or philanthropy work or whatever, but that's like the baseline that I want to leave my family. That's going to require an irrevocable type of trust structure. And importantly, I have to fundamentally change my relationship with the key material. I have to let it go. And this is the biggest, hardest pill for a Bitcoiner to swallow. Because I can't control the quorum. So I now have to trust, it's a dirty word in our world, but I have to trust somebody else in this framework that I can construct the framework. I can have sovereignty. I can have complete sovereignty over the structure, but I can't hold the keys anymore if I want to get the value out of my estate from a tax perspective and if I want to get them beyond the reach of the strong arm. Okay? Okay. Is your question related, Zach, or is that?
Yeah, it's like when to start considering an irrevocable.
Yeah.
I think I remember you saying last time, like pretty much everybody could consider.
Yeah. I think if you've got a pulse and a Bitcoin, you probably should have a revocable trust.
Especially with the long-term appreciation where it might be like weird to think about irrevocable.
When do you start scaling into something a bit higher up? Yeah, so again, Val, there are so many different variations of an irrevocable trust. It's kind of hard to describe. It's kind of hard to describe like a single archetypal reason to do it, but there are several. Colorado is not one of them, but there are about 17 or 18 states in the United States and a handful of foreign countries that allow me or you to create a trust. It has to be an irrevocable trust. Once you establish it, you cannot unilaterally change it. You can establish that trust for your own benefit and for the benefit of other people that you care about, and because you have taken your hands off of the assets inside that trust. If you are the one who runs over the pedestrian, the creditor cannot come after the assets inside the trust. They can come after the assets that you still hold in your hand, but the assets that you put in that trust before that event happened, those are off limits. And so that's one of the big benefits to that type of irrevocable trust. There are irrevocable trusts. Zach, you and I were kind of hinting at this a little bit earlier when we were talking earlier. This is a trust that I created for the benefit of my wife and kids. It's like I created a trust that's called a completed gift trust. So when I put the assets inside that trust, I let go of it from a tax perspective. And so then I said, I just want that to hold X Bitcoins. And so that trust, I can't be the trustee of that trust for the reasons I said earlier. I can't change the terms of that trust. Now there's kind of a sneaky back door to this trust called a trust protector. And maybe I will appoint Ben as the trust protector who can then make some certain modifications according to some constraints I built into the trust. So if circumstances change, then my trust protector can change the trust, but I can't change the trust. So not only are those assets beyond the reach of my creditors if I were to get sued, if Bitcoin goes from 65,000 to 120,000 to 240,000 to 500,000 to 2 million, all of that growth forever is outside of the reach of the IRS when I die. Not from an income tax perspective, but from a gift and estate tax perspective. So let's say that I put $5 million in that trust now, and then by the time I die, so I put $5 million in this trust. I said that my exemption is 14 million, 13.995, let's just round up. So I put $5 million in this trust this year. I file a return with the IRS and tell them I put $5 million worth of Bitcoin. I just disclose it. It's legal, it's fine. So now I don't have a $14 million exemption anymore. I've got a $9 million exemption left. I've used $5 million of my $14 million exemption. But then if that $5 million worth of Bitcoin grows to 10 million or 20 million or 50 million, all of that growth is outside of my estate. And I still have a $9 million exemption. So that $50 million, that will never be subject to estate tax when I die, and if the trust is managed properly, when my kids die, when my grandchildren die, and so on down the generations. And that's what a dynasty trust is. It allows the value inside a completed gift trust to continue to grow and never be subject to estate tax ever. Zach?
But just to clarify that last line, but it's not like it skips tax completely, right? Because eventually, if it's 5 generations from now, they cash out on some of that Bitcoin, they're going to pay the difference between what you bought for 50 years ago and what they sold it for, right?
Yes, right. So let's say that we've got $50 million in this trust now. Whether it's Bitcoin, real estate, doesn't make any difference what that is. So long as the value remains in the trust, it's not subject to estate tax. The trustee could reinvest that. Let's say that we sell some Bitcoin inside the trust. Yeah, would pay income tax, would pay capital gains tax inside the trust level, but maybe we buy a real estate compound somewhere in the mountains or somewhere on the beach or whatever, and that real estate is still held inside the trust. Well, that, first of all, that remains private and asset protected for the benefit of those beneficiaries, and because the trust still owns the asset, when the beneficiary dies, it's not included in their estate either. The only thing that would ever get subject to estate tax is if the trust distributed property to the beneficiary and then the beneficiary dies. Does that make sense? Yeah. It depends on how the trust is administered. So ordinarily, if the trust pays at the, it doesn't pay a higher rate, it gets to the highest rate fastest. That's another way. So yeah, it is kind of like a higher rate. It's like, it's the same rate, but it's just, you end up paying more tax because you get to the top marginal bracket faster. But capital gains is all at 20% long-term anyway, whether it's in a trust or in a individual's name.
So why would cash money out of that type of trust be subject to capital
Well, capital gains is a form of income. Yeah, so yeah. As opposed to ordinary versus capital gains. Yeah. It's a,
I was gifted a trust for the dead and
uh-huh.
story, but like I have a little nest egg that I have to take a distribution
Uh-huh.
for, and that's just subject to ordinary income.
If they're carrying out income to you, if they got dividends, like dividends are taken, so dividend, okay, so there you go. Okay, so it's the required minimum distribution off of a retirement account. That's going to be taxed to you at your ordinary rates. Same with dividends. If you've got stock that are paying a dividend, or if you've got shitcoins that you're staking, that's income that you would recognize as ordinary income. It's taxed at your ordinary rates. Same thing if you've got short-term capital gains. Gains that are a year or less, then you'd have, that gets taxed at it's short-term capital gains, but it's taxed at your ordinary rates. If it's longer than a year, it's taxed at the long-term capital gains tax rates.
I was just wondering why is the trust subject to capital gains at low rate versus
Well,
like it?
because the trust may or may not be a separate income taxpayer. Depends on how the trust is being administered. So right now, this dynasty trust that I created for the benefit of my family, I'm still alive, thank God. And so it's called a grantor trust. It's structured as a grantor trust, which means that I personally am responsible for the trust's income. And so that's a good thing, actually, because even though the trust, let's say if the trust sells an asset or if the trust has dividends or whatever, whether I receive that income or not, that income flows out of the trust onto my 1040. The trust does not pay a separate income tax, doesn't file a separate income tax return, doesn't pay trust income tax, which is good because as Zach pointed out, the trust gets to the highest marginal tax bracket, I want to say at around $15,000, $16,000, whereas the individuals is over $400,000. So it's like I can run the brackets a lot more as an individual taxpayer, and because this dynasty trust is me as an income taxpayer, it's out of my estate from an estate tax perspective, but it's income taxable to me. When I pay that tax liability, it is as though I've made another gift to the trust because the value remains in the trust. The trust is not being eroded by its own tax liability. I have to pay that tax liability, but because it's my liability, that is not treated as a gift to the trust. Does that make sense? And so now, in your particular case, the grantor who set up this trust is dead. So the trust cannot be a grantor trust. Your situation is a little bit different because you're dealing with a retirement asset in here. But let's assume it's not a retirement asset. If there is income inside a trust, if there's taxable income inside a trust, what a savvy trustee ought to do, if the trust allows them, is go ahead and make that distribution of trust income out to the beneficiaries so that beneficiaries are taxed on the income at their individual rates rather than capturing it inside the trust at the higher rates. But that's a decision that usually a trustee has the ability to make.
That makes sense. I was trying to figure out where is the government getting their income?
Yeah.
Why not just lend against the trust like that?
So you absolutely can. Absolutely can. What's your name? Brady. You bring up a really good point, Brady, because the bigger point behind your question is that at the end of the day, these types of trust structures and any entity inside these trusts, I mean, a lot of times we'll do like these layered and nested types of structures with various forms of limited liability companies owned by various trusts. These are just different financial vehicles that you can do whatever you need to do with them. You can buy, you can lend, you can lease, you can sell, you can do whatever you need to inside these trust structures. You're not like, even though like even like the terms of an irrevocable trust, you can't change. As I've talked about, you can leave a back door for a trust protector. There are other ways you can change, where you can allow to be changed. You allow an irrevocable trust to be changed as circumstances change. But at the end of the day, it's just a vehicle for managing assets. And then whatever those assets are can change as much as they need to change. You're not bound to anything once you're inside that structure. Yeah. Yeah,
So if you were to sell Bitcoin in that, you pay the capital.
right,
gains on it.
right.
Is that advantageous because perhaps you have other assets, so it reduces your taxable estate further, and you said keeps this trust going, but it also, maybe you're not working anymore, you're retired, so your income brackets are much lower.
Yeah.
Personal rates are effectively.
Yeah, exactly. Yep. Yeah, lots of ways you can run, like tax, like income tax. Yeah.
That's when it's like the trust now takes all that.
Well, the trust, yeah, the trust might pay all of that income tax at the trust level, but depends on how the trustee administers it. Because the trustee, depending on how the trust is designed, but the trustee can either keep, let's say that the beneficiary is a junkie and you don't want to dump any money in their lap. Okay, well, then I'd rather pay higher income tax than have the beneficiary go buy some meth. Okay, that's a trade I'm willing to make. But if the beneficiaries are all just like well-adjusted people or whatever, I would want the trustee to have the discretion to then just carry out the income to the beneficiary, so the income gets taxed at the beneficiary, not captured inside the trust.
When you say carry out income, do you mean like distribute the unrealized appreciated Bitcoin to them so that they sell it personally?
Well, so if it's, I mean, you don't have, there's no tax on unrecognized gains, at least not yet. And so if there's not income inside the trust, you don't even have to, if you're just sitting long Bitcoin and there's no income inside the trust, this isn't a problem. But if you have sold Bitcoin inside this trust, you're going to have capital gains income at that point. Then the trustee needs to make the decision, we're going to distribute that income out to the beneficiary, so then the beneficiary picks up that capital gains tax income on their 1040 rather than capture it inside the trust.
How, like, is there an order of operations, like, does the Bitcoin have to be distributed before sold to the beneficiary that's gonna get the money? And a follow-up question, like, how do you actually classify that income as like the beneficiary's income instead of the trust as the trust?
Yeah.
How do you actually, like, do it?
So, yeah, so the first answer to your question is no, you don't have to sell the Bitcoin inside the trust. You can distribute the property in kind. So the Bitcoin, the beneficiary can set up a wallet and receive the Bitcoin. Okay, and just carry it out. It's a distribution of principal, not income. And so, but if the Bitcoin, if the beneficiary is a normie and they don't know what to do with Bitcoin, then yeah, then the trustee would have to sell the Bitcoin at that point, distribute the fiat to the beneficiary. You now have a capital gains recognition event that's going to get picked up on the trust's income tax return, which is the 1040. And it's going to show a distribution of that trust income to the beneficiary. They're going to pick that up on their 1040. Okay, so the trust will file a 1041. That's the fiduciary income tax return. The beneficiary will have to file, of course, their 1040, just their ordinary income tax return.
So you don't have to distribute it to them first in order to distribute the income classification.
No, correct, right,
You just do that, it's just like in tax form.
right, yep. And there's a whole cottage industry around trust accounting and income management, that kind of stuff that I'm like nominally conversant in. But one thing I did want to talk about, which it's like I think I talked about it a little bit. I didn't catch your name. Yeah, Audrey. Okay. When Audrey was asking the question about kind of sizing your exposure. But it's Joe. So I know that now. So he's been doxxed now. He just KYC'd himself in the room. One of the things I wrestle with this ideologically, and Chris and I were talking about this earlier, and I'm working on a white paper that kind of talks about these issues. Again, I'm wrestling with this because ideologically I'm with you, Val, like no KYC, all this. I mean, my spirit is there. But we still live in normie world. We're still governed by fiat laws. We're still subject to tax laws. And so we have to make a choice. If we want the benefit of these strategies, we have to play by those rules. If we don't want the benefit of the strategies, then we can just YOLO and do whatever the hell we want to do. But if that breaks down and we needed one of these strategies, how do we actually make the strategy work? In order for a trust to have substance and actually do what it is supposed to do, the trustee has to legally own the assets. Now, if Chris is my trustee, he could be the legal owner of the assets, but he's not the beneficial owner. He is legally the owner as a fiduciary, and he is bound by the law and bound by the terms of my contract with him, the trust agreement, to only do with my assets, Bitcoin and all, what I've authorized him to do. So that means, how do I get my stuff into a trust? With most assets, it's easy. If you've got a brokerage account, then on, like today, you've got your brokerage account in your individual name. Then you go and you set up a trust. And now you want to get that brokerage account into your trust. You can do one of two things. You can either open up a new account in the name of the trust, Chris Ash as trustee of this trust, and then I as the owner of this account, sends an instruction to my broker to then wire the securities to this new account in the name of my trustee, of my trust. So now the brokerage account, the brokerage firm knows that when a decision has to get made regarding those assets, it's not coming from me, it's coming from the trustee. Why? Because the trustee is the title owner, the legal owner, not the beneficial owner, but the legal owner of those assets. If I have a piece of real estate, I have to do a deed from myself to Chris as the trustee of that trust. And now the whole world is on notice that Chris is acting in a fiduciary capacity on my behalf with the full weight of the law resting on his shoulders. If he breaches his fiduciary duty to me and absconds with those assets, then he is screwed that's a legal term, but he's in trouble with, so it's like, if he has violated the terms of that trust, then he is subject to both civil and criminal penalties. If I have physical gold is a bearer asset. There's not a name on a bar of gold that means anything. So if I have a physical vault of gold in my house, and I want that physical gold in my trust, I have to do one of two things. I either have to call somebody to move that vault over to Chris, and I have to allow Chris to change the combination and not tell me in order to get the value beyond the reach of my creditors and out of my estate from a tax perspective, or Chris has to go buy his own security-approved vault, and then we call a Brinks truck to come move the gold from my vault over to his, and now I just have an empty vault. Or maybe I have some dust in my vault, but the bulk of it is over here. But now, that is established legal ownership in my trust. What happens if I decide I don't like Chris anymore? I can remove him, and I can hire Val as my trustee. If Val decides that she's not going to comply with the law, maybe I'll have Brady be my trustee. I don't know. I don't know where I get these ideas, Val, but I'm just kind of picking on you. But
KYC Val. Are we recording this? Like, really?
yeah, I'm talking about Val Kilmer. It's fine. Okay, so, and this is where it bristles me as much as it bristles Bitcoiners, other Bitcoiners of mine. It's like, if I want my Bitcoin in that trust structure, I got to do the same thing. I know Oy is right. And so back to Audrey's point, this is now how I start to size what I want to hold tightly in a very low friction environment. I can do whatever the hell I want to with my with my unilateral cold storage Bitcoin or the Bitcoin I've got in my warm wallet to go buy pints with. Even in my revocable trust, I can have that in my Unchained multi-sig or in my Casa multi-sig, or I can even have it just in unilateral, whatever. It doesn't make any difference. I just have to think through my key succession protocol because I haven't changed. I'm not looking for tax outcomes. I'm not looking for asset protection outcomes. What I'm looking for is continuity of that wealth if I die. That's what Casa solves for. That's what Unchained solves for. And those are great solutions for that. That's what multi-sig is built for. But if I want the value beyond the reach of my creditors, and if I want the value outside of my estate from an estate tax perspective, I cannot control the quorum anymore. So then, what we do, because we're working with clients that are this whole spectrum into the tens and hundreds of millions of dollars worth of Bitcoin. And these are OGs who, I mean, these are the conversations that we wrestle with day in and day out with people who have been in Bitcoin for 15 years, longer. What we have opted for, our primary custodian that we work with is Anchorage Digital. They've got a U.S. national charter, and they also have a Singapore charter as well. And we use them for a couple of different reasons. One, every other qualified custodian that we're familiar with right now has a state banking charter, but not a federal charter. And so like BitGo, great company, we did a lot of work with them early on as we were growing, but BitGo has a South Dakota banking charter. South Dakota is one of my favorite jurisdictions from a trust perspective. But if something goes wrong at Bitcoin, they're backstopped by the South Dakota Banking Commission. If something goes wrong at Anchorage, they're backstopped by the United States Comptroller of the Currency. It's like bringing a flamethrower to a knife fight. I would rather have the biggest, baddest backing if something were to go wrong at my custodian. So that's one reason. Another reason why we like them, again, and I'm not shilling for them, it's who we've chosen to use because they're the best that we found so far. Their system is very transparent. If I'm entrusting, this only matters in the irrevocable trust context. In the revocable trust context, which is what probably 99% of people need, this doesn't even matter. Casa, Unchained, do it all day long. It's the best solution you're going to find, hands down. But once you're looking for these other protections, you have to get into kind of some of these deeper strategies. Another reason why we like the Anchorage type of interface versus like a distributed multi-sig. I know that like OnRamp has got a three-party institutional multi-sig. I'm not sure from a legal structure if it works yet. I haven't really looked under the hood yet. But if I'm going to put my Bitcoin into that structure, I can't hold a single key. It's a M of N, and I'm not any of those. So it's got to be three large institutions. I don't know any of them. And unless I track the wallet address, I have no idea what's going on with my Bitcoin at any given time. The UX that you have through Anchorage that we use is the client, the one who set up this whole thing, they may not have the ability to initiate or veto or endorse a transaction, but they can have visibility all the time through the UX. So not a single sat can move without the client knowing about it. You don't have that same protection that I'm aware of in some of the other multi-sig solutions. Yeah, Zach? So I'm not familiar with, I've thought about this a fair bit, and the way I'll answer the question is this. There are two steps to getting these tax and legal outcomes. There's the There's what's, I even wrote this down. Anticipating your question. I think I did. Anyway, you have to do two things. I wrote it down on my other notes. The first thing you have to do is you have to sever, this is a tax term, you have to sever dominion and control, which means you have to you can no longer hold the asset. And I do believe that holding a minority quorum, like having minority signatures on the quorum, probably gets you there. But the other thing that you have to do, the other step is you also then have to reestablish dominion and control in this new entity. So if you, let's call it a 3 of 5, and you hold 2, well, your trustee has to hold 3. If you want to not only sever your dominion and control, but now reestablish a new trust environment. So this is why, I mean, again, this is part of what I really want to see happen kind of more broadly in the community is like, look, I love I don't want this to come across wrong. I mean, I love our relationship with Anchorage. I would love to see other solutions come up that doesn't require centralized institutional custodians to sever dominion and control. Right now, it just doesn't exist. Because I know the technology exists, the law isn't there. So that's what we have to get to. Because right now, the law is the impediment, which should surprise exactly 0 people in this room. The law that we're kind of trying to take advantage of here was written in the 17th, 18th, 19th, and 20th centuries. And so it's like, bit what? That doesn't, you want to do it like a multi-sig what? That doesn't make any sense to them. It's like, but I think again, the analog Bitcoin example still works because let's say that I give Chris my physical vault. And I tell Chris, you reset this combination to this vault and shard it into 3 separate shards. If he still holds enough of the shards to control the movement of those Bitcoins, I think that works. But if I say, I'm going to hold a shard over here, Chris, you can hold a shard of that, and you have to give Valerie one of those shards as well, well then, Chris isn't really the trustee because he can't control the assets inside the trust. What happens when a market moves in a really advantageous or really adverse way? And the trustee is liable to the trust beneficiaries for the performance of the assets inside that trust. It's like if he can't do what he needs to do to discharge his duties as the trustee, then he's really not much of a trustee. So if he has to say, well, what if Val says no? What if he can't reach Val? Well, what if he can't reach Val, but he can reach me? And now I'm cooperating in the movement of the assets inside this trust. Again, I have not fundamentally changed my economic relationship with those assets. So that's why multi-sig doesn't work in its current construct in the existing Normuland world of trusts and tax and the law. Right, totally, absolutely.
And so, what do you believe, it's okay if you don't have an answer to this, but do you believe that if that person then hired Valerie to perform a key management service on their behalf so that they had some, security model which actually furthered their duties as the trustee and protected those assets, do you think something like that would be, legitimate, where sure, they have domains that they've set up the proper safeguards in place where they can't just unilaterally access it?
Yeah, I don't know. This has not been tested to my knowledge. So it's right. And so it's like, I mean, I'm eager to see somebody be the first test case where it gets established. I mean, that'd be great. It ain't gonna be my client, but and it ain't gonna be me. But I think there are more reliable ways to get you there with a higher level of transparency and with a higher level of predictability. And the way we usually help clients set up Bitcoin inside of a trust, the Bitcoin isn't actually sitting just kind of naked inside the trust. I mean, first of all, there are very few trustees out there that will actually sit on Bitcoin itself. And as a result, it's a seller's market and their fees are very high because they're relative unicorns in the space. Just call any trust company in Colorado and ask them if you can put Bitcoin in their trust. They're going to say, I'm sorry, I think you have the wrong number. They're going to send you to some place in Wyoming or someplace like that, and you'll find maybe a handful of trust companies that are out there. But then they're sitting on Bitcoin natively inside the trust. We actually think that a better way to do it, I'm not going to go into a ton of detail because some of this is like, because it's being recorded. But remember that a trust can effectively own anything. But the assets have to be titled. Well, if we put Bitcoin directly into the trust, the trustee has to have some type of custodial mechanism, a multi-sig of some sort at a minimum. And that's just like, think of it like an account. And so we have our Bitcoin sitting just natively inside the trust. Well, then if you want to, let's say that Bitcoin moons more than it already has, and you want to do something besides just hold Bitcoin in here. Or let's say that you want to enact a lending regime and you want to borrow against that Bitcoin. Well, then you're going through the trustee every single time you want to do that. That adds a lot of friction in the transactions. Usually adds costs and usually slows down the process. What we think is a better approach is rather than put the Bitcoin up here, again, this is not appropriate for most people. This is like big level planning. But what we usually will do is we'll put a limited liability company down below. And then this limited liability company will usually onboard to one or more qualified custodians like I described. And depending on how much value, how much fiat value of Bitcoin we're putting in here, we might even diversify these custodians across multiple jurisdictions. Like we might have one in the United States, we might have one or two outside the United States. And then we set up the key management regime inside this entity. And we can fragment that as much as we want to. But then the LLC owns the Bitcoin in one of these little pockets. And the trust owns the LLC. So this gets you a couple of things. Let's say that we select, so first of all, this opens up the universe of jurisdictions for our trusts because most jurisdictions don't know what to do with Bitcoin. Wyoming does, which is great. Nevada is starting to think about it. South Dakota is starting to think about it. But a lot of other states, a lot of other jurisdictions don't know anything about Bitcoin. So you're kind of limited to the jurisdictions you can use for a trust if the trust is going to hold Bitcoin directly. I mentioned Wyoming has pretty good trust laws, but I actually like Nevada's better. I also like South Dakota's better. I like the Cook Islands even more. And so if we had whatever jurisdiction, let's say we have a Cook Islands trust over here. Cook Islands is a tiny archipelago way out in the South Pacific off of the coast of New Zealand. It has the most secure asset protection laws in the world. And so then maybe we use a Wyoming limited liability company down here. Wyoming literally invented the limited liability company. Every LLC law in the world owes its origin story to 1977 when Wyoming literally invented this as a form of business. So then, or another one that we like to use is Nevis, which is an island in the Caribbean. So then what happens? Our Bitcoin is owned at this level. If I run over a pedestrian and Frank wants to come after my Bitcoin, he has to first prevail in Colorado, and then I'm going to say, well, it's not my Bitcoin. The Bitcoin is owned by a trust in the Cook Islands. Well, then he has to go to the Cook Islands and then prosecute the claim there. Well, he's got 2 years to do it. Shortest statute of limitations in a reliable jurisdiction in the world. So let's say Frank does that. Well, Frank is not admitted to practice law in the Cook Islands, so he has to hire somebody from New Zealand to fly to the Cook Islands to then bring the case in the Cook Islands. By the way, Frank doesn't like this because the Cook Islands doesn't accept contingent fee cases. You have to pay as you go to bring a claim. So if you're the plaintiff, you're paying out of pocket to go against this trust. Let's say that Frank does that. And so this is obviously going to go one of two ways for Frank. He's either going to win or he's going to lose. Well, let's say that he wins. Well, all he's done here is now he's inside the trust. Well, the trust doesn't own Bitcoin. The trust owns an LLC interest. So then Frank has to get his smiling ass down to Nevis inside that statute of limitations period and then penetrate the corporate veil of my Nevis Limited Liability Company. And then let's say that he does that. It's not likely, not impossible, non-zero chance. Well, then he's got to go execute a writ of seizure against the qualified custodians. Well, if this qualified custodian is in Singapore, then he's got to fly out to Singapore and then convince the custodian to divest the LLC assets. Not impossible, but very difficult. Okay. Oh, by the way, his client is paying out of pocket all the way. Remember, no contingent fees. So the client is going to say, please, Frank, let's just settle. Let's just settle. But let's say that Frank starts this and he actually doesn't win. The Cook Islands has a loser pays regime. So if the plaintiff is unsuccessful in bringing their claim, they have to not only pay their own costs and all the court fees, they also pay all the costs of defense. So massive barrier to getting to these assets. Meanwhile, kind of back to the original part of this argument, the part of this design, we can use any jurisdiction we want as our trust if the Bitcoin is not natively in the trust, but inside of an entity owned by the trust. We have multiple layers of entity protection, potentially multiple layers of jurisdictional protection, and depending on which custodians we use, we can have a very transparent mechanism by which the Bitcoin is actually held. So the client is usually serving as what we refer to as the investment manager. Nothing happens inside this LLC unless the client says so. But then if they want the asset protection and tax benefits, they will usually have an independent general manager, kind of functions like a trustee. But this general manager is bound by the law and by the document to only exercise the directions that the investment manager says. Now, because the client is sitting here and the client is the one who set up this whole shebang, they get to remove and replace anybody they want to in this stack anytime they want to. They don't have to have a reason. They can just say, I think that your hair looks stupid and you're fired. I get that a lot. I don't get fired a lot, but that's, anyway. But then, you just sometimes. But then, these keys can be set up, again, the way we do it with Anchorage is they usually have like initiation signatures, endorsement signatures, and the way, I mean, I'm not going to go into a ton of detail, but let me just say that you have to navigate multiple oceans in order to move Bitcoins with these types of structures. So it's a very resilient, but also very transparent type of framework. He would probably quit when he realized that it's an irrevocable trust that was structured this way. He's going to go after other assets.
It doesn't completely protect.
It protects these assets. It protects these assets. But you're not going to put all your assets in here because you don't want, I mean, who wants to live with all of this friction over all of their wealth? But if you've got a whole lot of wealth, I mean, remember that most people are not going to go down this road. It's like most people are going to stop with a revocable trust. They have complete control over it. We're under 15 million bucks. Just have a really good revocable trust. Use CASA, use Unchained, use something like that. You're golden. But then when we're dealing with big stacks, and now we're 125 Bitcoins and more, and we've got multiple generations that we're trying to preserve wealth for, then we need to start thinking about more advanced strategies like this, and only that amount that we don't want to have free and ready access to, only that amount goes into something like this. But if you've got thousands of Bitcoins out there, even hundreds of Bitcoins out there, maybe you're going to put something like 20%, 30% into a structure like this. Because again, there's a lot of friction. It's not like this is not your everyday Bitcoin. This is the stuff that's like generationally transcendent type of stuff. Yeah, Chris.
Something I've heard you say before is just kind of challenge between the not key
Yeah.
and the self-sovereignty side of things, but then that I think what really stuck with me before is that when you say humanity is the ultimate force of self-sovereignty, this actually kind of displays that
Right.
a lot more, right? Where it's like if you think of Bitcoin as a protocol, and then you have these legal protocols that you're like layering on top of this Bitcoin protocol, and you have more control over your wealth and then how that gets distributed to your family as well. So can you talk a little bit more
Yeah.
about how maybe some of this helps shift some of your clients' perspective a little bit when you talk about how humanity is
Yeah. I mean, that's a good reminder because yeah, the first thing that I learned in the Bitcoin journey in 2017, I sat at the feet of guys like Andreas Antonopoulos, who just pounded in my brain, not your keys, not your coin, not your keys, not your cheese, all that kind of stuff. And so that's part of, and Satoshi, remember what this was. This was a successful experiment in peer-to-peer electronic cash. It was designed explicitly to facilitate commerce over the internet. It's in the white paper. I've reread it 5 times this week. I mean, I read it all the time. And so yes, it is electronic cash. Private, decentralized, does not need centralized intermediaries to facilitate trade. That's great. That's right. That's wonderful. Truly. Its decaying supply rate also makes it an impeccable store of value. Both things are true. It is an impeccable medium of exchange. It is also an impeccable store of value. The not your keys, not your coins mantra that was pounded into my brain is true to a certain degree if and to the extent the value of your Bitcoin is like the value of your cash. You want the same level of constraint on your Bitcoin, on your electronic cash that you have over your normie cash. I'm not going to put my everyday walking around, go fill the car with gas, Bitcoin, in a convoluted structure where I can't control the movement of those assets. But what I've really kind of been trying to work through is realizing that unilateral control over my key material, that is a form of sovereignty. But then when the value of that peer-to-peer electronic cash has become what it has become in the hundreds of thousands of dollars now, and for many people millions upon millions of dollars, I think that sovereignty should be kind of reimagined as bringing to bear the full weight of opportunity so you can control every aspect of what happens there. Now that does mean that if I want the strategy to give me the benefits, I have to let go of the key material. I have to give up this form of sovereignty, and and I've got to upgrade that to a different form of sovereignty. It's not binary, though. Again, remember, I've got walking around sats that we can just go buy a pint with. I've got Bitcoin in a multi-sig in my revocable living trust. If I wanted to go buy a car with that, or if I wanted to go do something else with that, I've got a little bit of friction in there because I've got other signatories that I need to attach to that transaction. But there's no tax. I mean, there's income tax on the gain. It's like kind of nonsense. But it's like, there's not like a legal impediment for me to do that. But I still have exercised sovereignty to a point to make sure that that process is privatized when something ultimately happens to me and the people I leave behind need access to my stuff. We don't have to go to the judge to get permission to do anything with that. And then the stuff that I really care the most about, the Bitcoin that I want my grandchildren someday to have, I will give up this form of key sovereignty in favor of structural sovereignty. But it's a nuanced kind of way of thinking, and I haven't really figured out the right way to land on that yet. I don't even know what time it is. 10 till 9. What other questions you guys have, or what? Yeah, Joe.
Earlier you mentioned about probate.
Yeah.
It seems like that's kind of the default for real estate homes, less stuff. Can you kind of speak about maybe like what most people might run into probate, pluses and minuses,
Yeah. Well, first of all, this is not a probate play. You don't have to do this kind of nonsense to avoid that. Probate really exists for a very narrow set of circumstances, but unfortunately that narrow set of circumstances applies to most people. By which I mean, most people own property in their individual name. Whether it's a bank account, whether it's a piece of real estate, whether it's a vehicle, whether it's a retirement account, life insurance policy, whatever, it's got your name on it. And during your lifetime, you do whatever you want to with that. It's yours. But then something happens to you. You get sick, you get injured, and you no longer have the legal ability. You're incapacitated for whatever reason. Or you die. Then the reason probate exists is to allow some third party, usually a family member or a close friend, to be authorized by a court to make certain decisions regarding your stuff. Because your name is on that stuff. And if they need to sell that, close an account, claim the benefit of your life insurance, do whatever they need to do, they're not you. So they've got to go get what are called letters of administration or letters testamentary, if you happen to have a will, that a judge will sign off on and says that your executor under your will or your probate administrator, your court-appointed manager, can now do what they need to do within the confines of the law, and they get to report back to the court in a public proceeding. Joe had this, these are his assets, these are his liabilities, this is what we paid, this is what's outstanding, have I done my job, Your Honor? And they've got to go stand in front of the court, in the courthouse, and give that testimony, and again, it's a public proceeding. A will doesn't avoid that process. In fact, a will actually guarantees that process. Because all a will does is provide written instructions to the judge about what you wanted to have done. If you don't have a will, the judge is just going to rely on the Colorado statutes. Colorado statutes have a flow of what will happen to your stuff if you died without a will. In most circumstances, what I've seen, it's not usually what most people want to happen to their stuff. Because if you're single and unmarried and you still have parents, it's going to go to your parents. If you are married and don't have kids, very often half goes to your parents and half goes to your spouse. If you're married and do have kids, usually half goes to your spouse and half is split among the kids, and it all just goes outright. That's usually what happens under like the default rules of any state. There are nuances, but that's kind of the flow. If you have a will, you can say, Your Honor, I don't want the state law to apply. I want my rules to apply. But the same process is in place. Somebody that you name as your executor in the will goes and files a petition. They usually wait 6 or 8 weeks for the petition to be heard. They go and there's traffic cases, there are marriages going on, there are drug cases going on. It's just another case in the docket. And it says, in the matter of the estate of Matt McClintock, who's here on behalf of the estate. Lauren McClintock is here as the petitioner with the will. He's going to read the provisions of the will. It's all public. It's going to get picked up in Lauren, as my proposed executor, is going to have to file a statement in the newspaper. There's still newspapers out there, but she'll have to file in the newspaper. About 90 days later, she's going to have to report back to the court and say, here, Your Honor, are all the assets that this dead guy had. Yeah, right. Coinbase deals with this, and it's not very elegant, as you might imagine. But yeah, it's like, and so then look at the other side of this too. Let's say that you were a business owner or property owner, and now all of a sudden your business competition sees, oh, this person died. They had these assets. I wonder if I can pick those up on a bargain because we got a distressed sale situation. It's all right there in the public record. So it's like, it's a shitty outcome. It's just bad. And so the type of trust that I think everybody ought to have, the revocable living trust, it solves all that problem. It solves that problem if you take the additional step and transfer the assets to that trust. Now again, this whole rigmarole of trusting somebody else with your key material doesn't apply in the revocable trust context. Remember what I was talking about, this whole convoluted, multi-sig, does it work, does it not work, qualified custody, all that stuff, that doesn't matter in the revocable trust context. That only matters out in the thin branches of extreme planning. But what most people should do is have a revocable living trust, ideally with some pseudonymous name as the name of that trust. It's not going to be the Joe Trust, it's going to be whatever name you come up with. And then you're going to retitle your assets in your name as trustee of that trust. So instead of it being in my individual name, it's in my name as trustee of that trust. And so this now puts the public on record on my real estate filings. It puts my custodians on record in my fiat accounts that the trust owns these assets. And then when I, as the trustee of that trust, have become incapacitated or dies, the next one in line that I put in my trust agreement steps into my shoes and they just manage those assets according to the terms of that trust. They don't have to file anything with the county. There's no conversation with the judge. It happens privately. And so that's why I think that for a Bitcoiner especially, that is like non-KYC probate right there. It's like this is how you maintain a level of privacy around what are some of the most delicate times in a family's life. So I think that, I'm just an advocate for having a revocable trust as like a baseline planning. Yeah.
Two, if we have time, beneficial owner information.
Yeah.
Is that gone? Is it coming back?
Yeah, you're talking about the CTA, Corporate Transparency Act. Yeah. Sorry, I decided to sit. I've been standing a bit. Yeah, so last time I was here, the CTA was still very much in flux. I think you might have been there. You look kind of familiar. So the Corporate Transparency Act, just as a quick TLDR on this, was this one of the most ill-conceived federal laws. It's hard to know. It's like they start to kind of get lost in the mist because I think most federal laws are really ill-conceived. But this one was really bad because it basically, first of all, it was killed in committee when it was first proposed. And then it got tacked on to the Defense Authorization Act of 2020. So it's an election year, it's a Defense Authorization Act, nobody running for re-election is going to vote against that. The Corporate Transparency Act was tacked onto that, and so what it did is it said that all limited liability companies, corporations, partnership, well, not really, well, limited partnerships, other entities like that that were formed by filing documents with the Secretary of State, those entities have to file, they have to register on a new federal database to disclose the beneficial ownership information for the creator or the owner of that structure and or any control person with more than like a 25% interest. It was, anyway, it was, I think it has although it kind of went back and forth. I even did some notes on this. Let me just reference my notes real quick, because I anticipating this question since we talked about it last time. I thought we'd talk about it too. So, so what happened in March? We kind of back and forth on this. I think Mississippi or Alabama sued, got an injunction in their jurisdiction. Texas then imposed a nationwide injunction. The Supreme Court said, no, you can't do that, Texas. The CTA is back on. Then Treasury said, screw you, SCOTUS, we're not going to enforce this thing. So Treasury said in March they're not going to enforce penalties against individuals who don't comply with CTA because they are redoing the rules. Effectively, what is likely to happen, it looks like, is that U.S. entities will be exempt from the Corporate Transparency Act disclosure rules. Foreign entities with foreign owners will not be exempt. They will still be subject to the filings, but a U.S. owner of a foreign entity will be exempt. Does that make sense? So it seems like the CTA, it's still murky. We don't have real clarity on this yet because they've kind of pulled it back from enforcement to go back through the rulemaking process again. We'll see where it goes, because the law is still on the books, but we're on this like enforcement moratorium right now. And do you have another question? You said.
Yeah, please. More speculation or cap gains exemption. Just pie in the sky. Never gonna happen.
I don't know. I mean, I don't know if it's pie in the sky, never going to happen. I would say it is exemption. I think is extremely remote because we're talking about $120,000 per token right now. What I think is low-hanging fruit that I wouldn't be surprised if we get this year is some de minimis exemption, like around. I mean, it's like useless, but like $600 or maybe $1,000. It's ridiculous. Maybe we'll. I mean, I think what I think would be more reasonable is like a $10,000 limit that then gets indexed for inflation. I mean, it's like, why should we have to worry about disclosing if we're just going to do, again, if we're going to buy pints at a bar someplace, or if we're going to pay for our membership in the space? So why do we have to track our basis for these small amounts? I think that with the current administration and the momentum that's in Congress, I think we might see some de minimis exemptions in the $1,000 or less range. Now, I don't know. I would imagine it's going to be like per year, not per transaction. So you can't just do like a gazillion microtransactions and get around it. That would be a step in the right direction. I do think that hoping for that day that Bitcoin is completely exempt from capital gains tax. I mean, I think it would require truly a cataclysmic change. That if that happens, I think there's a whole lot of other interesting things happening too. But I mean, your crystal ball is probably as good as mine. Yeah, I would. Yeah, exactly. That's like, of course, and it's easy getting because the Bitcoin lobby is growing and vociferous, but it's not like normie level of. It's not like the insurance lobby or the bankers lobby. So we'll see. But again, kind of back to the point, I was giving Val a little bit of a hard time about this earlier, but I do think that the days of getting away with circumventing reporting, I think those days are largely gone. Because the risks of a misstep are so significant. And even if you know everything about what's going on, there's a pretty good chance at some point there's either going to be a protocol failure, we've seen that plenty of times, and or you're going to surface that Bitcoin through somebody else who doesn't know what they're doing, and so it's going to be KYC'd at that point, or it's going to come across a fiat desk at some point. It's like, and then they're going to have a compelling, legally defensible story as where this Bitcoin come from. So it's like, it's, you know, I think it becomes this exercise in self-entertainment to try to come up with these cute little workarounds, when at the end of the day, complying with the law gets you a heck of a lot more juice if you do it right. And it's like, do we really want to be the people who are just a bunch of, I mean, look, I freaking hate the federal government and taxes and all that kind of stuff. That's one of the reasons why I've done what I've done for 25 years. I became the kind of lawyer I became after tax classes in law school. And I thought, it's kind of, first of all, it's grotesque how many bites the federal government gets at every dollar that a taxpayer makes. I mean, bite after bite after bite. And then I had this epiphany in law school that the tax code is actually like it's just a rule book. And if you can figure out how to connect the opportunities in here, then it's like, okay, well, you can kind of beat the government at its own game if you understand the rules. The tax code is thousands of pages long, and it's not by accident. And so, yeah, you end up having to pay expensive experts to do this kind of stuff, to do it right. But then, you know, what's the price of sleeping well at night and knowing that whatever you've worked for all your life is secure, rather than just kind of sit around dreaming up these convoluted ways to try to cover your tracks, having to look over your shoulders, waiting for something to go wrong. I know it's not a really popular sentiment in the Bitcoin space necessarily. I think I've got enough street cred in the Bitcoin space. I've been around long enough. I think I can speak somewhat candidly about that. But again, I share the tension. I wish that people like me didn't have to do what we have to do to accomplish the kinds of things that we have to accomplish. But you know, you can either wish it ain't so, and but it is, you know. So and until that day that everything collapses into the sun, then these are the rules. It's the best I've come up with right now. I mean, the part of the cool thing about this is that we're always learning. I mean, this is a structure that we largely invented about 2 years ago. But yeah, it's like, so let me put it this way. Those who have the guns get to make the rules. And right now, you know, the power is in the lawmakers. You know, they control the economy. They make all the rules. You know, and I was talking to one of these guys earlier tonight. It may have been Wyatt. It's like, this is kind of what happens when we get what we wanted. You know, this is what happens when Bitcoin hits $100,000 and stays there, and the Overton window is now publicly traded companies are adding billions and billions of dollars of Bitcoin to their books. And sovereign nations are talking about adding Bitcoin as a corporate reserve. It's like, okay, we won. We got what we said that we wanted. A lot of us thought, you know, it's like, and perhaps at the same time, what we wanted has changed. Because when we first got into Bitcoin, it was this anti-centralized form of money, peer-to-peer electronic cash, no need for an intermediary. It was and is that. The reality is that Satoshi programmed it in such a way that it cannot help but go up in value against a loose monetary policy. The value of the dollar goes this way, hard assets go this way, Bitcoin has gone that way. When you zoom out, it's basically a vertical line. So that may not be what we thought we were signing up for, but Bitcoin has infiltrated the normie world faster than the normie world has figured out how to adapt to it. And so we're still in those early days. I know it's such an overwrought phrase that we're so early, but now we still are very early in the traditional financial, legally structuring Bitcoin world. It just happens to be at a time when Bitcoin is $120,000 per token. Yes, it is electronic cash, but it's also this is not just like my Bitcoin mania talking. It is unmatched as a store of value. I mean, we all know it's performed like nothing else in human history. Both things are true. And so we have to apply a more sophisticated, more mature, more nuanced way of thinking about how we solve for managing our Bitcoin wealth. Because what worked for the virtual pocket change as our peer-to-peer electronic cash does not scale when it is the bedrock of our family's wealth. So I guess I'll kind of leave it at that. So thank you, everybody, for your attention and for your great questions and the conversation. I hope that's not a sour note to leave on. Yeah, so thanks, everybody.